In this video, let's take a look at 3ds Max and let's take a look at the interface and how you operate 3ds Max. So if you're using the lab's computers, go to Lab Apps and then open up 3ds Max, or if not, in your computer just open up 3ds Max. The version that we're going to use is 3ds Max 2020, and when you start 3ds Max, this is the first screen that you'll be getting. You'll have the option of selecting either the classic 3ds Max or design. Now there are no particular differences in how 3ds Max functions really, it's just a matter of difference in the interface. So basically in the design version it looks more comparable to other Autodesk AEC products, so that's why we have a design component, but in this class I'm going to use the classic version. So click on the classic button here and say continue. That should be okay. In your computers, if you install 3ds Max, that message shouldn't pop up, but if in the lab for some reason there is that message that comes up, but that's okay. So you'll be seeing this welcome message when you start 3ds Max. You can uncheck this if you don't want to see this. The next time it just gives you kind of a overview of what 3ds Max is. It shows you where you sign, it shows you the different areas of the environment, the interface, and it goes on to talk about how you change views, how you use your mouse button. It's used for information, especially when you're starting off, but since we don't want to see this next time, I'm just gonna click on don't show this welcome screen and then close it off. Now when you start 3ds Max, this is the default screen that you'll be seeing. Now we have in the middle we have viewports, 4 viewports, which is kind of similar to, if you've used Rhino, this is probably what it resembles. In SketchUp we didn't have different views. Now in 3ds Max you have the top view, so you can see an object from the top, 2 elevation views, front and left, and then you have a perspective view. Now you can change all of this if you go onto this panel here, and you can change different viewport layouts, and it depends on what you want to see and how you navigate the interface. And you can, if I click on this particular viewport layout, it's going to change my, but I prefer this layout where I have the top view and 2 elevations and a perspective, so I'm going to stick to that particular view for the duration of this class. On this side you have the main muscle of 3ds Max. You get all of the things that you need to do, or the functions, on this command panel right here, and this command panel is divided into additional sub tabs on the top. As you can see, 6 subtabs, and then each panel has different types of tools that you can use. Now this is the first one, the create panel. On the create panel you get standard primitives like boxes, spheres, cylinders and such. If you drop this down, there are additional primitives or shapes that you can create, like extended primitives, and we'll take a look at these in a different video, but there are different types of shapes and objects that you can create. And even if you go in even further, you have things like particle systems that we saw in Unity. You have those, you have compound objects where you can merge objects together, and we'll look at Boolean operations and such using compound objects. Then you have NURB surfaces, AEC extended objects such as railings, walls, foliage. Then you have stairs, different types of stairs, and then fluids and such. So we have a whole bunch of things that we can create in the create panel, and just in one section where it says the geometrical objects. You have a whole bunch of things that you can do. Then you have different shapes, basic shapes, lines, rectangles and such, created using splines. And then you have NURBS, curves and such. You have lighting, different types of lighting, photometric, standard and Arnold. Now Arnold is a rendering engine that Revit uses, 3ds Max uses, but we won't be going into Arnold or rendering inside of 3ds Max, because rendering in 3ds Max is a little bit complicated and I don't want to go into that. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to create geometry inside of 3ds Max, and then we're going to take it into Lumion and then render it in Lumion. I think that's a much easier way to mitigate issues with rendering. But just to know, Arnold is the rendering engine or the mechanism that 3ds Max uses to render. Then we have different types of cameras that we can use, other object types that you can add inside of 3ds Max, different environmental factors that you can add. Then we have other settings as well, system settings. Then we have one of the main panels inside of this command panel is the modifier list. So we're going to use a bunch of modifiers during this this section of the class for 3ds Max. Then we have hierarchy, then we have motion parameters. We're not going to go into all of that, too many things at least, but we will focus mainly on this create panel, and then the modifier list. We'll focus mainly on these two panels because we're looking at creating geometry and modifying the geometry for our purpose, our design purpose. On the top you have the main toolbar, a regular Windows toolbar, so file has new, reset, open, save, basic commands, import, export, as you've seen in other computer programs. And then you have groups, tools. All of this can be done using the create panel as well, so some of those are duplicated in here. And you have a ribbon here. You can make it larger if you wanted to, but in order to use the space efficiently, I'm gonna have it as such, minimize it, and then we have other areas where it says where my file is located. Then you have buttons here in the main toolbar, which shows you select, rotation, scale, the basic things that we've seen in other programs as well. Then we have the rendering panel here, and then we have a sign in here. If you have an Autodesk login, you can sign in to access some of the Autodesk functions. For students, most of the functions are free, so that's your Autodesk login. And on the bottom you have a timeline, which we've seen previously in Enscape, where you could use it to establish keyframes and then animate a certain sequence. But in 3ds Max we're not going to go into animation, but just so that you know, this is a keyframe animation that 3ds Max provides you to create animations. Then we have different types of workspaces available. Now if you drop this down, you have different types of workspaces that you can swap your current workplace to. So the design standard, if you go into design standard, it swaps to the design standard. As I mentioned, this is a design interface, and it has most of the interface looking like what you'd see in programs like Revit. That's the only difference. So I'm just going to go back into my default interface. So that's kind of the interface in a nutshell. And in the next video, what I want to do is I want to go into some of these create tools in the create panel, and then look at how we can move them and navigate this particular interface.